Today's webinar is being recorded, and all attendees and registrants will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording in the next few days. Please feel free to share it among your peers as you would like. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Kathy and Liz. Thank you so much for attending. Please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. This is Kathy Day.
And this is Elizabeth Spudich.
And welcome, everyone. We'll get started. So just a quick review of the objectives for this. We are going to discuss the idea of reliability and validity in terms of test taking in general, to make sure that you gain the understanding of the use of biological materials specifically in testing, how to design your ExamSoft database to effectively control for these variables and the variables inherent in lab practicals, as well as testing procedures to improve your validity in practical exams. So the team that really worked on this project was not only myself and Liz, but additionally Chris Wade, who's was the course director for physical therapies anatomy and their dissection lab. So actually, Liz is going to start things off in terms of content, talking about the lab practical itself.
Hello, everyone. So I just want to kind of bring you up to speed. This study was basically designed in the physical therapy department in the PT anatomy course. This is a course that had 62 students in it. I want to take a minute to show you the layout of our rooms. So this is one of our larger anatomy dissection rooms in the dissection facility. We can see that there is one door in, and that is something that you need to keep in mind when you're designing the layout of the practical exam and how the students will move through those questions in ExamSoft. We can talk a little bit about that later on. In this specific room, we have the capability of having 12 cadavers in the room. We use 10 for this course with 6 to 7 students per cadaver within the course. You can see that we have counters along the sides, and we will use those counters during the practical examinations for display of bony specimens or isolated organs to quiz the students on. We also have in the room a number of computer stations, so each table has a computer on a boom, and we utilize those computers extensively during the practical examination as well in order to quiz the students on their imaging capabilities. So we will put radiographs or CT scans or MRIs on the computers as well. The next, where am I going here? So here is the physical layout of how the examination was set up. You can see we have 36 stations, 6 of which will end up being a rest stop. So there are 30 questions that the students must answer. The doors would be set up somewhere over here, if you can follow my arrow, and the students would come in, and we have station 1 here, and they would snake through. The numbers along the sides here would represent stations that utilize those countertop spaces, as well as over here, 19 and 20 would also utilize a countertop space. On the bottom of this slide here, from 22 to 34, these would be computer stations that would have isolated images on them as well. Now, I mentioned earlier about the one door in being an issue. There are 2 different ways that you can set up a laboratory examination using ExamSoft. You can do a traditional way, putting a student at each station and going through a circuit, or you can ribbon the students through so that everyone begins at station 1 and ends at station 36. Because we only have one door in and the same door out, we chose a circuit to run our practical exams through, and that plays into how the questions are set up and how the some of the selection processes with respect to backtracking and things like that. When we set up the exam, the students were, the exam was posted, the students downloaded the exams, and each student was given a very specific time to arrive at the examination facility. We ran 2 groups of exams through, and what we would do is we would line the students up in the hallway outside, give each student a number, and that number corresponded to the station they would start at and the question they would begin at in the ExamSoft exam. Once the students were lined up and we verified that they understood their number process, we gave them the password. They opened up and began the exam. They got their machine to the correct number, and then we moved them into the room and we set them up at their stations. Okay. It was at that time that we would begin the timer, the external timer, and the students would move from station to station and question to question when the timer went off. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. Oh, one more thing. So at the end of the exam, the students were brought outside, they uploaded their exams, and for this course, they got their grades immediately and went into an analysis of the exam immediately after the practical exam, while the next group was being set up in the hallway. So that's some of the logistics of how we ran those examinations. Kathy, you want to take over from here?
Okay. I will probably still talk about process in terms of how the actual exam was set up. So in terms of selection, probably one thing that we should say is that the PT program began by using multiple choice exam questions, and I believe moved into, and I'm going to have Liz correct me if I'm wrong, we moved into fill-in-the-blank style questions during the course of the various dissection practicals.
Yes, so in this course there are 3 practical examinations. The first examination was a mixture of multiple choice and fill-in-the-blank questions. And gradually we weeded out the multiple choice until the final exam, which was completely fill-in-the-blank.
So, and one of the things that you will definitely have to consider is the concept of giving the students a little bit of an additional period of time to type for the fill-in-the-blank questions. We have talked about the possibility of instituting what I'm going to refer to as an answer list that is associated with numerics for some of the much more lengthy responses, and so a student would identify that answer and type in its numeric. We do really want to look at now and in the future the use of fill-in-the-blank questions over multiple choice questions because of the improved reliability statistics for that style of question. We did leave them, now again, the room timer is what I'm referring to, not ExamSoft timer, but the room timer, we did allow for 1 minute and 15 seconds when we were using fill-in-the-blank, as opposed to 1 minute for each question when they were multiple choice. So that brings us to the idea of the ExamSoft timer. We did not set the ExamSoft timing properties whatsoever because of the fact that we were using the room timer. We did not want students to, if for any reason whatsoever, happen to get kicked out of their exams. So we did use the physical timer, which is an audio timer, pretty standard in practicals.
The one thing this was kind of a pilot program for us using ExamSoft and iPads in the cadaver lab for the practical exams. We were unsure as to how long it would take to set the students up in the hallway and to get them to their station. So that was one of the reasons why we went with a no timer in the ExamSoft platform. I think in retrospect, you could set a timer. It would just need to be generous with respect to the actual timing of the exam. But certainly you could set, a 2 or 3 hour timer just to give yourself a window of time. It actually, the logistics of getting the students into the hallway, getting them their numbers, getting their exams opened and into the exam room went far smoother than I think any of us expected it to go.
Yeah, that was probably, I'm going to estimate that took for sure less than 5 minutes and probably even like 2 or 3.
Yeah, it probably took less time than just allowing them to meander in on their own, as we do in some other courses. They were in there, they were in line, they had their number, they marched in. It was pretty well militaristic almost.
Yes. Now the other thing to just make sure, because again we piloted this with the smaller group, which is the PT students, and that's a cohort of 60-ish. So we did have those broken into 2 groups, and they entered the practical back-to-back in terms of timing. The first group, when there's actually like an ante-room type space where they gathered for their secure exam review, and the second group was in another different ante-space on the other end of that hallway that, let me actually take you to the hallway real quickly. At the other end of this hallway, it's actually right to the left of the end of this hallway, and that's where they gathered. So we were able to bring them in and have them exit pretty much separate from each other. So we weren't really worried too much about security because we definitely had them grouped together and, again, started the first cohort at the same time, and they did not have any ability to confer with each other because the second cohort moved in while they were doing their secure exam review. So since we're on this topic, do you want to talk about projections for the much larger SKMC group at this time?
Not right now. Let's.
Okay.
I would rather talk
Okay.
about actually setting up the exam.
Okay.
And the logistics of that day.
Okay. Again, one of the other setup parameters would be the idea of whether or not you're going to use the secure exam review. They did do a secure exam review, and that's very much standard course of practice with the PT school. And of course, it's excellent to be able to do that with the students because the stations are still relatively fresh in their minds. They're not literally at the station when they're doing the review, of course, but it immediately follows the practical so that they're getting their feedback and they're able to, while the cadaver and the anatomy is still relatively fresh in their minds, they're able to look to see, how well they performed. Anything more now? Do you want to talk about the setup of the actual practical at this point in time?
Yeah, I think we need to we talked about the day of. Let's talk about the day before.
Okay. Okay.
So in terms of setting up the exam within ExamSoft, if anyone who is listening, if anyone knows about setting up a practical examination using cadavers, but be they human or cat or fetal pig, there's no real good way to determine what structure will be found at what cadaver or what station. So that made it logistically a little bit more difficult to set up an exam like this in an electronic database. The way we got around it was we knew approximately what types of structures or which structures for each exam we wanted to tag. So we had a list of taggable structures. We had our bone questions already pre-laid out in a folder in ExamSoft, and we had our imaging questions pre-laid out in a folder in ExamSoft. we went in on a Sunday afternoon, because these practical exams were bright and early Monday morning, and we would tag the specimens randomly. We didn't worry about what station it was going to be at. We just kind of went and found good examples of these structures wherever they may be. Then we went around with a cart and a laptop, and we pulled the questions in station by station. So if you can see, we, station 1, we would start here. This might be an isolated organ. We would pull that isolated organ question from the folder in ExamSoft. Then we would add the appropriate imaging question here. Then we would add a bone, another specimen, a rest stop. So we had questions that were available to us in the folder, and we pulled them in, added them, and edited them for the specific exam as we went around after tagging the materials. And that way the questions were in the correct order, the distractors were edited, or if it was a multiple choice, the appropriate correct answers and variations of that answer were added for a multiple choice, or edited if it was a question that had already been created. So that made setting it up just a little bit more difficult and easier at the same time. We didn't have to worry about finding a specific structure at station 4, because that was the question we had at station 4. We found the structures we needed to find and then built the exam when everything was tagged as a team.
And I would definitely recommend that, because I do remember, I think it was the very first one we set up, Chris had really wanted to have the test produced, if you will, so that all of the questions were actually ordered already in the exam. So again, think about picking your questions from your assessment and then reordering them on the spot. And that actually gets pretty confounding, especially when there's a room full of individuals that are discussing, why or why they might not like that particular question. So it definitely is very beneficial and saves a lot of time to just do the process that Liz had just described, which is pull your questions together at the station and literally build it while you're truly building the practical.
Yes, it just makes it less stressful. You have a list of structures you want to find. You may not find them all, but you might find something better that's not on the list. There's just a lot of variability and things that change during the setup of a practical exam. It's very difficult to be rigid in what questions you are going to ask before you get in there and see the conditions of the bodies and see the conditions of the specimen. So even though it seemed to Chris in that first exam that it was going to save a lot of time having the exam built, it ended up being a lot more stressful, because like 50% of the exam ended up having to be changed, either reordered or reworded the questions or new distractors built, simply because of what we found when we got into the bodies. So I highly recommend have a folder of potential questions for different structures you might want on a particular practical exam. You can build that folder ahead of time, but on the day of, you build the assessment. I think it will go much smoother that way.
And is there anything else that we should talk about in terms of process that you're coming up with? Because I think that we covered all.
So one thing that we did, we have the imaging stations here alongside. So these were computers. So we had preloaded a PowerPoint with those images on it. But the questions in ExamSoft also had the images as well, so that the students had the ability to zoom in on those images. Another thing we did, of course, all of these stations are signed with great big yellow and black numbers so that the students can find them. But just as a backup, we printed out the stem of the question for each station, at least for the first exam, so that the students had the ability just to kind of check where they were with respect to the ExamSoft and the station, so that they wouldn't get confused. We did that, I know, for the first exam. I don't remember if we did that for the third exam as well. We didn't. They were pretty. The students were pretty well attuned to it by the time we got to the third exam. But for the first one, we did print out just the stem, not the answer choices, but just the stem of the question.
And of course, you know, I'm glad that you're talking about this, because you will definitely have to allow for open navigation. So you will have to allow for backtracking when you're doing the circuit design. When you're doing the circuit design, that's essential, because again, not everyone is starting at the same location. In fact, no one is starting at the same location. We did not, I was a little bit concerned that we would have some issues with students then advancing forward, and when student who started at 36, or when a student got to 36 and then had to go back up to question 1, that may cause confusion or delay. And it did not really, I mean, they were really very flexible with that. They didn't get off track with where they were in the exam.
Yes, and so that was one issue that, again, I had concerns with too. Would they remember? We had a proctor standing roughly in this spot, just to remind, a gentle reminder for students that you have to go back to 1 now. But that wasn't a large issue. I actually think the backtracking helped eliminate the sense of, oh my God, I'm lost in this maze. With Scantrons, we get students always, I don't remember what number I'm on, all the dots look the same. The ExamSoft and the ability to backtrack really kind of allowed students to not get lost in the exam, or if they did, they were able to recover a little bit easier. The other thing that I noticed logistically is people had questioned me about exam security because we allowed them to backtrack, but I actually felt that doing the practical exam on the iPad and ExamSoft was actually more secure than a Scantron, because I could see if I saw your iPad, I would see the question you were on, and only that question. I wouldn't see your entire Scantron sheet, and I wouldn't be able to hone in on your question number 5, which I didn't understand. So security, in my opinion, was actually enhanced by using the iPad in this format over and above what the Scantron or kind of a handwritten fill-in-the-blank exam would have given us.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm thinking about too that we can probably move to next is this idea of using the iPad. Now, we of course used iPad. We did not feel like our group was an iPad group. That whole cohort of students has iPad. Even though our product for them is not iPad only, we run their program as though it were iPad only. They are not taking exams on any kind of laptop device. So to that extent, it really does keep things moving quickly, because it is a handheld device. They can hold it in their hand. They won't be laying it down flat where somebody could, in fact, kind of peek over and see exactly what they're doing. And then additionally to that, it really worked out very well in terms of biohazard and, infection control type ideas. The students, of course, are not touching specimens in a practical. They are not supposed to be messing with or touching anything, and so we really had no issues with the students needing to rest themselves or any objects anywhere. And
there was no ick factor on your. But even that, I have run a number of dissection courses, and I have an iPad that has all of my atlases on it, and I bring my iPad into the dissection room, and I have a case that is a waterproof case that allows me to clean up my iPad or not let it get dirty. Students do bring iPads into the dissection room. Some of them have cases. Some of them use Ziploc bags. It all works. Everybody's happy.
So I think we probably covered logistics. I'm going to make sure that you're happy with everything that we said.
Checking my notes here. I'm
okay.
pretty sure we can kind of start. Oh, we did have, so one more logistic thing. We did have some paper copies available just in case. And they were printed out, printouts of the exam with spaces either to fill in the blanks or to circle if it was a multiple choice. I believe we used paper exams twice during this course. One girl showed up with a very low battery, and we didn't feel comfortable putting her in there with only you know, a 10% charge on her iPad, so she opted to take a paper exam. There was another girl, for some reason, was having problems downloading on her device that day. I think it was a technical issue we figured out later. She also got a paper copy. When we had to give out paper copies during the practical exam, we started them at 1. So they moved through in order, just to make it a little bit less stressful for them in terms of flipping pages back and forth and things like that. So setting up this way does not preclude the possibility that you might need a paper exam. You just have to kind of plan for, you have to plan for that and figure out where that person's going to start. And we chose to start those people at 1.
Okay. I'm actually just going to return us to that very first slide to make sure that, okay, so now, according to our slide deck, we're going to talk to you a little bit about the idea of anatomy specimens, specifically biologic specimens, and how we are controlling for that with our questions. And would you like to lead that off, Liz?
So when we were thinking about how to track question performance in an examination like this, it came to the forefront pretty early that we needed to track not just the question, but things like, was it a fresh dissection? Was it a student dissection? Was it a dissection that was done by one of the faculty, a faculty prosection? How old was the prosection? We have a number of prosected cadavers that we have in tanks. Some of them are very new, some of them are older. Because we really felt that some of these organic changes that could happen in these specimens over time may in fact impact question performance within an exam or across exams. So we had to build into our categories different types of categories. So we weren't just talking about the, was it an imaging question, was it a leg question, was it a back question. We also had to think about, was it a student dissection? Was there considerable pathology in that specimen? Was it a prosection? Because you could imagine if we tagged something in the abdomen that was on a cadaver that had significant pathology in that abdomen, would that change how the student approached that question for that year? So Kathy and I came up with an enormous potential list of categories, and I think we've used each and every one of them, or maybe not. But we had specimen categories, so we tracked them by human gift registry number. For any given year, we knew whether or not the specimen was a pathological specimen, whether it was a normal specimen, whether it was a prosected specimen. If we had questions on surface anatomy, using, in other courses, We use surface anatomy questions. We actually use live virtual patients. Can we do live and virtual? We do standardized patients for our surface anatomy, and that all changes with how old the patient is, how young the patient is, their skin tone, color, their height, their weight. So we thought that there were many more variables that would need to be tracked in order to adequately assess question performance.
So this actually was a relatively easy item to do once we thought about it and ruminated on it for quite some time. What actually really probably started the dialogue too, I would have to say, or really created that idea in my mind, was the fact that with practicals, for example, oftentimes the question STEM is identical, because if it's an identification question,
identify the structure in the loop of red string.
Exactly. So categories are really essential with practicals, and then we really expanded with this concept of really taking a look at not only, you know, tracking the question to find it and in a very pragmatic way add it to the exam, but then see the performance of the question and try to do our best to hold these other variables, not that we can hold them constant, but we can certainly look at trends, particularly based on the HGR number, and take a look at trends over time to see if specimens are degrading, to see if, in fact, you know, a question is not performing based on that particular item. So, you know, you'll see too that we do ask different, or we do control for things like whether or not we're asking about the shoulder and it's really based on a CT or an MRI or an X-ray, etc. So that, again, we can further pinpoint in terms of student feedback and performance what they need to hone in on, you know, in terms of their study and their
yeah, so it gives us, you know, some of the basic categories you can see here are, you know, was it an identification question? Did it talk about function? Was it based on anatomic relationships? Was it strictly or did it have a clinical application component to it? And so those are all kind of pseudo-Bloom's taxonomical classifications. But from an assessment of the curriculum standpoint, you know, we really wanted to know if students were good at MRI imaging but not CT imaging, or if they were good, you can see down here, if they were good at imaging of MRIs in a transverse section but not in a sagittal section, because students don't often see sagittal planes. They don't see them as often as they see axial or transverse planes. So we really wanted to get as much out of the database and the questions as we possibly could. So if you look at our questions, each question has a category that's not just a kind of an assessment hierarchy, but an extensive hierarchy based on the region of the body, the systems that were addressed in the question, the plane of existence, the pathological, the HDR specimen, whether it was a free organ, a current student dissection, a prosection. So we spent a lot of time thinking about everything we could possibly ever want to track in an assessment hierarchy, and I think we covered pretty much everything.
I think you're right. So it did, again, it took us a little while to do that, but it really, I think, was well worth it and is well worth it.
What we really didn't want is to get into a situation in a few years' time and see a question that had performed well in the past suddenly not perform well, and not know whether it was because the students did a really poor dissection, or the prosection was getting old, or the specimen was dried out. And so we really tried to fit those, or at least try to keep track of those variables so that we could understand aberrations in question performance over time.
And again, do keep in mind that you'd really be using your longitudinal reports to take a look at that kind of information. So in terms of technical side of ExamSoft, it would be your longitudinal reports that you'd be looking
Although I do remember that we did a report just very quickly on this exam, and if I remember correctly, there was one specimen, there was one cadaver that for some reason all the questions on that cadaver were low performers, and it was consistent through all 3 exams. And you know, now we would go back and maybe take a look at that cadaver and say, you know, was this dissection really that poor, or were the questions that ended up on that cadaver really just that difficult, which is also a possibility as well.
Okay. So we probably covered that. I'm looking at my notes, and I think we covered that pretty extensively. Okay. So I'm going to bring us to our final slide and make sure that we cover everything that we wanted to make sure we talked about. So we really just did cover this concept of looking at the reliability of the questions and why we spent so much time and effort, particularly on the categories. I do know that my colleague Liz Spudich is looking into the possibility of a specimen database. I'm also considering helping her and just doing a homegrown database so that we can begin to track the specimens. Again, you know, we were able to very quickly and easily look at degradation in test scores, and then go back to that specimen database and say, okay, this specimen was put into service, you know,
5 years ago.
5 years ago, and maybe we need to retire it. So the that whole portion of categories and how it relates to reliability was a big topic, and certainly I think we pretty much handled that. Question design, again, the idea of fill in the blank, really requiring, because of the ambiguity of the STEM, really requiring that you are consistent with using your categories. And in all of my, because I do look at the entire university and support the entire university in terms of technical support as well as training and the like for ExamSoft, I do find that fill in the blanks far outperform multiple choice in terms of reliability for an item type. And so that idea of using more fill in the blank and pushing us toward that, it's very easy to do, of course, with ExamSoft. You can, you know, make allowances for, and you do get reports back in terms of numbers of students who have one particular type of answer over another. It's really very easy to auto-adjust scoring. We did look into or are discussing the idea of using an answer set. I don't want to say a key because obviously the right answer is not indicated at all, but using an answer set associated with a numeric to save time, particularly for these larger classes.
So I actually, I run practical exams, clinical exams, not in the dissection lab, and we did use an extended matching type list that the students received as a printout and were able to view for a minute or two prior to the start of the exam so they could get kind of a lay of the land. We ran those. The students would, in ExamSoft, would be shown images or video of people with neurological symptoms, and then they would have to, in the fill-in-the-blank spot, simply write out the alphanumeric key for where the lesion was or the syndrome was. That worked exceptionally well for the course we did, but that was a sit-down exam. I'm a little bit more hesitant to use an extended key for a practical examination. I would rather give them 10 more seconds and have them type it out, personally, myself. I think juggling an extended key back and forth, even if it's electronic, I think would be a little bit flustering for the students. I'd rather just have them type it out if we go to a full fill in the blank for different practical exams.
Okay. I'm not remembering what in particular I spoke about with case study and branching other than the PT program. Did we?
So we had talked, Kathy and I had talked once or twice about doing instead of a single question at a station, having a much more comprehensive or integrative practical exam approach. For instance, if a station had, at one station, it could be 5 minutes and the students would answer a group of questions surrounding the heart and a coronary artery. Building a little bit more integration into the practical exam other than simply, one station, one question, move on. Asking them higher order questions about a single structure that was tagged, or showing them a tagged structure and giving them in ExamSoft a case analysis or symptoms or lab results that they would need to ruminate on and answer a series of questions. So that would be, you would be grouping questions. Group A would be one station, Group B would be another station, and you could have multiple questions within the group, and the students would move through in that way. So that is something that we're thinking about moving to eventually, but certainly not today or tomorrow.
Yes, and so I actually, sorry, I took a note at my future, I took a look at where I had the future notes, and the idea with that too, going back to test design, is that would compel you to do a ribbon design. So, you wouldn't really be able to do a circuit design necessarily in that instance. You would really pretty much have to have everybody, starting at station 1, and then with a ribbon design moving through the various stations, exiting when they're finished. So that, of course, in terms of question design / examination design. I do know we have had an individual in our PT school who used a branching logic styled question, and she did it as an essay. And so so that she ended up having to hand grade each one of those, but the situation was that she showed a movie clip, and then she had people identify a gait disorder. Gait, I refer to gait as in G-A-I-T, walking disorder. And this particular video may have had more than one, in fact, it did have more than one gait disorder. And so not only did they have to identify a single gait disorder, but then talk about the physical therapy that would be indicated to ameliorate that particular gait disorder. That, of course, did require her to go through and hand grade them, but she was very happy to do that. And I don't know if you've explored ExamSoft's essay-styled grading, but it is very straightforward, and she was thrilled with the ease with which she was able to grade those 60-plus students, again, class size about 60, and I believe she used maybe 2 or 3 of those clinical scenarios, and I got nothing but positive feedback from her about that. So that's just something else to put out there. And we kind of touched on the idea of our longitudinal analysis, and it has actually shown us some, questions that we have to ask ourselves then about particular specimens and test design, and we kind of covered that, I think.
And one of the things that we're going to do kind of retrospectively We have 2 years worth of medical students who did not have ExamSoft for their practical exams, but we do have their Scantron information. And so what we're going to do is we're going to retrospectively build those 2 years worth of exams and import the Scantron data into them so that we can begin to build for the medical college account a pool of practical exam questions where we do have some performance data on them. We are still juggling back and forth with whether or not we want to move to ExamSoft for practical examinations in our medical school, mostly because of the size of the cohort. This year there are 273 medical students starting, and working out the logistics of that, and in all honesty, getting the rest of the faculty who are not necessarily as tech, and they don't embrace technology as much as some other professors. So getting the rest of the faculty on board with doing a completely electronic exam. But a lot of it, we're not ruling it out. I'm not ruling it out, but there are a few higher hurdles to overcome with the medical school class, one of them being the size and logistics. But even if we don't run the exam with iPads, we still use Scantrons, we'll still be able to build the exams in ExamSoft and import that data and still get the longitudinal analysis and the grade reports and the strengths and opportunities reports to the students, just like a written exam.
Yes, so in terms of workflow, we're definitely looking to convince the crew because it certainly would make, it would make things quite a bit easier in terms of the logistics. It would end up being a ribbon design, I think, is what Liz and I determined.
We thought about that, but I actually think, I don't know that we would need that.
Okay.
I think we could go to a circular design. One of the biggest logistics is when you're building the medical school practical exam, you are building it across, we have 4 separate rooms, and the students move in and out of the 4 separate rooms, so we have about 8 or 9 people who build the exam, who do the tagging, and it's more like wrangling squirrels in that situation. So it's the logistics for the medical school in terms of setup would actually be actually reducing the number of people involved in the setup so that we could keep a handle of who's tagging what, where, when, and being able to move through and build the questions in a more efficient manner than we might currently be doing it now. In the medical school, we have actually 56 stations that they move through, 6 being rest stops, 50 being actual questions, also including the at least 2 standardized patients. And in all honesty, the standardized patients are why I wouldn't want to go to a ribbon design, because the ribbon design wouldn't allow us to switch those standardized patients out. And these are typically older individuals who volunteer their time, and we often have 2 or 3 sets of them that we rotate through the 5 or 6 rounds of the practical exam. And doing a ribbon design would not allow us the break to move 1 set out and 1 set in for that. So that would be why I would lean against a ribbon design for that.
So I think Stephanie now would be opening things up for questions. Let me just, there we go, for more information. So I'm going to move us to the final ExamSoft slide, and I think Stephanie would be entertaining questions.
I will. Thank you so much to both of you. This was such a great presentation, and we've had so many amazing questions already come in. So We're going to try and get through all of them, folks. If we don't have time to get through all of them, you can either pose them to the email address on the screen, or I can have either Kathy or Liz reach out to you later on to answer them personally as well. But we're going to dive right in. So Kathy and Liz, the first question that we have is, do you provide the iPads or are they student-owned?
Well, that would depend upon which college you are attending here at Thomas Jefferson University. So for some of the programs, the students must provide them themselves. For the medical school, we've just started this very recently, for the medical school, the students get handed an iPad at the beginning of their stint here. So, but that is very new. Last year was, in fact, the first time that the incoming class got iPads, which really makes the practical exam on SofTest-M very easy. We couldn't do this if we had a mixed device situation.
Yes, and so in terms of a technical component, I'm going to say one more thing about that. So yes, as Liz had said, it's very much dependent upon the college that you're referring to, and we do not manage any of our iPads, so that even if a student is handed an iPad, that is not managed by our technology department, our computer department. None of them are managed, so they're completely student managed. So I'll just leave it at that.
That could be a whole nother webinar.
Yes.
Great, thank you. We might have you back for that one, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know about that.
Next question is, when you use fill-in-the-blank questions, are they one-word answers or greater? And if so, how many alternative spellings do you have, or do you avoid that with a structure list or word bank?
So for anatomy, they're often more than one word. Flexor digitorum superficialis, for example, is three words in Latin. So it can be a considerable amount of typing, which is why we went to a slightly longer station format to accommodate that. We try to anticipate the different variations that will come up in an exam, and we're pretty good at it overall. Again, we don't use an extended matching list or a data bank that the students can draw from, simply because we really want them to be able to identify these structures cold. Even if we as professors think that we have gotten all of the variations, the students, because of fat fingers or just phonetically typing things out, will always come up with something that we don't anticipate. But I'll have to say, in ExamSoft, grading those options is really easy at the end of the day. You go to edit the question, and it gives you a really nice list of all of the things that were, all of the variations that were entered, and it's really easy to go through them and very quickly pick the ones out that were marked wrong that should be right because they put an R where an S should be, and very easy to see what is absolutely wrong. And if there was a variation that is absolutely correct that you didn't think of, you can add that automatically to the options, to the fill-in-the-blank options for that question, and you'll never have to worry about that variation again. So it seems onerous, but it's actually very easy to manage that level of variability.
Great, thank you. Next question is, does every cadaver table have a clean area, I assume, where the students can safely rest their laptops and iPads to compose their answers?
No, they don't. They hold them in their hands, and they type either with two thumbs or one hand. and that's never really been an issue.
And we do not and have not used it for anything other than the iPad. So again, this is an iPad cohort, and we don't have people using laptops at all.
Okay, next question is, what was the added time to build the exam using ExamSoft versus the traditional handwriting?
You know, when I think about it, when we finally got the flow of setting the exam up, I actually think it took less time to set up in ExamSoft than it did by kind of typing everything out, or writing everything out, then going back to my office and building the questions, and then printing the questions out. Everything was done right then, and I think it was much more efficient than some of the other ways we have built exams. Coming in with questions and then finding out that's really the wrong question for that station, or we don't have, we had to go to a different thing, and then having to go back and change questions. I felt it was really much more efficient with ExamSoft than it was the old-fashioned way, and that's my opinion.
And then I'm going to follow up with that. If you think about the concept of duplicating a question, so let's say, for example, the STEM is the,
identify the structure and the loop of registering.
Exactly. Thank you, Liz. That rolls right off her tongue.
I say it all the time.
Then it's really easy for you to duplicate that question and then maybe change a few distractors, especially if you're talking about something where those same set of distractors essentially make good sense. So then all you're doing, you're not copying and pasting in a Word document and trying to annotate for yourself what you're going to do, with the Word document, or doing it right there with a Word document. So it actually really is significantly easier in the long run.
Yeah.
And not even in the long run, kind of in the short run too.
Yeah. It was a little bit more efficient this time. Once we sat down and really thought about how the flow would be best optimized, it really was a lot easier, in my opinion.
Okay, next question. We cannot afford to purchase iPads for our students. Could you envision using laptop computers for practical exams?
I can envision anything. I think you would need to have, again, someone brought it up earlier, a clean space at each station. And there's so many different permutations of labs and cadaver labs and microbiology labs and everything. So absolutely, you just need to have more space at that station and a place for the students to rest their materials. Or there are kind of rolling laptop carts. That adds some more money, but if it was a capital thing and you had 25 kids in a classroom, you give them all a little rolling cart and they move through the stations that way. So absolutely, I can envision doing this with multiple platforms or multiple devices quite easily. If ExamSoft ever comes out with an iPhone app, I could envision them taking it on their iPhone or their Windows phone or their Android. So yes, I think if you are compelled to do it that way because of the inability to either require all your students to have an iPad or an inability to provide them for all your students, then yes, I think laptops would work. You just need to work it in logistically.
And kind of a follow-up question to that is, do your students use full-sized iPads, iPad minis, or a mix? If you have any experience with minis, were there any concerns about screen size?
None of our students, the PT program gives them the iPads, and it's all regular size. The med school gives them regular size, or AIRs, which are the full screen size. Now, for other classes, so when we first went to ExamSoft about, I guess last year, or 2 years ago,
Yeah.
The med school cohort that I was involved in, they did not get iPads. Students had a mixed panel of devices. Some had iPads, some had iPad minis, some had laptops, Macs, PCs, every permutation. Those students who had iPad minis took exams on ExamSoft in iPad mini, and some of them included digital images, and I don't recall any real issues with that. Mostly because even if the image is smaller, ExamSoft in SofTest-M they have the ability to zoom in on that image and move around and navigate on that image and make sub-windows smaller or bigger as they see fit. So, there wasn't an issue with the size. I joked about the phone. I think a phone would be an issue with the size if you were doing digital images, but who knows?
And so that's a really good point to bring up. The particular program that used the multitude of devices, the particular course before the students were actually given iPads was microanatomy.
Yes.
And in that instance, you don't have anywhere near the need for orientation like you would with gross anatomy. So they use, slide type digital images all the time in terms of their learning as well as their testing. Now, one of the things that I can't obviously insist upon anything, but I very, very strongly encourage is that people add any and all images as attachments as opposed to embedding the image in the actual STEM web-enabled text box. And again, then the user, the student, has the ability to pan and zoom, and in that instance also the instructor does not have to worry about and have the mental overhead of resizing images and making sure that the image is exactly the size that it needs to be, etc. So I definitely encourage everybody to use images as attachments.
Which is odd because when we did this in histology or microscopic anatomy, we didn't put the images in as attachments. We put them in the STEM.
Okay.
And a lot of the professors were concerned, oh, it's going to be too much, resizing. And we just had to come back at them and say, this is a generation who is absolutely used to resizing windows all the time. It's not my generation, growing up on a Commodore 64. These students are computer savvy, and having to resize a window or zoom in and out, for the most of the students did not faze them one bit. So I have to go with putting it into STEM, but that's just me.
All right, last question that we're going to have time for, and I'm so sorry, folks, because there are a lot of really great questions here, but we promised to follow up with you afterwards. Last question is, in a circuit system with timer where you allow backtracking, how do you prevent students from bumping into each other? If a student's at a station and another student wants to go back, do you allow them to stay at that station at the same time?
They don't move back in the station. They can move back within the question list in ExamSoft. They have to keep moving forward station to station. So that was a great question. We didn't really clarify that. The backtracking has to do with the settings on ExamSoft that you need to allow the students to backtrack, because if a student starts at 34, then moves to 35 and 36. If you don't allow them to go back to 1, they can't complete the circuit. We don't allow them to move physically back to station 5 if they are on 6. So they are moving through the stations in order. They are allowed, you have to set the ExamSoft parameters to allow for backtracking so they can complete the circuit.
And Stephanie, is there any way for you to make sure that we restated that in a clear way? Because I do not want people to think that we actually allow students to go backwards physically. And that's just a technical setting.
Yeah, so I think your explanation was very clear. So
okay.
they're talking, you guys are talking about how the students can backtrack through the questions in the actual software on the iPad, but not physically in the actual practical setting.
Exactly. Thank you, yes.
Perfect. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here, everybody. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know this is a very busy time of year for everybody getting things done before the fall semester. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar was recorded today, so we should be sending out a link to the recording within the next 48 hours for everybody to share as you would like. Also, as you close out of the webinar, you will have a short survey. It's only 5 questions pop up for you. We would really appreciate you taking the time to fill that out so we can make sure we provide relevant content at all of our webinars. Thank you so much to Kathy and to Liz for your presentation. We appreciate you being here and sharing your experiences, and everybody have a wonderful week.